Hello, welcome back. This is chapter 2 of the story of my son, Jason, who has autism. The first video, my introductory video, was chapter 1, and it kind of explained how we discovered something was wrong, and he was diagnosed with infantile spasms, and so that's where we'll pick up today. So my son, he's doing very well now, and I'll introduce you to him at some point, and then I'll talk a little more about where he is down the road. But I want to give these first few chapters to sort of catch you up on his story, our story, and how we ventured into this autism world. So once he was diagnosed, he was at 4 months old, having Salome seizures, and was diagnosed with infantile spasms. They prescribed Clonopin, which was an anti-seizure medication, and so on. Anyway, and some other things, but basically it did calm his seizures down over time. They had to try different dosages and so on, of course. And so I had to give him that several times a day. The problem was at 4 months old, when he should have been sitting up, rocking, he already could roll over and sit up, but what happened was the medication made him sleep most of the time. And after a few months of that, he pretty much regressed to where he was not rolling over anymore. He wasn't cooing. He wasn't getting up on his hands and knees at all. He could still sit up, and we could still feed him and so on, but he slept most of the time. It was a little strange, to have him sleep all the time. So that was worrying, but it was better than the seizures, because the seizures were definitely going to harm him in other ways. So consequently, he was not mobile enough to start developing a lot of his muscles and do the things that he should be doing as far as locomotive skills and developing his coordination and so on, all the things he needed to do, crawling, to progress to walking and standing. So when I took him in for a checkup, they realized he was hyperflexive. So that meant that he was extremely flexible, and that's because of the lack of muscle tone to counteract the flexibility. So he needed to have those muscles that helped him stand up, do other things, and he hadn't developed those because he was laying down all the time. We had bought him a jumper, and my mom bought him this spinning, rocking thing, which was wonderful. So he slowly had started to build up his legs with that, but he still was hyperflexive, and the doctor prescribed occupational therapy. So he was able to get a few hours with a therapist, and they taught me how to do things with him. Although most of what they taught me, interestingly enough, is what I was already using in my child development, physical development classes. I'm a gymnastics teacher, and my sister and I had started this program that was specifically for children that had difficulties in developing their motor skills. So we had kids that were, they had, like, one young little girl had arthritis so bad she couldn't even step up. She was, I think, 6 years old, and she couldn't step, she couldn't hop, she couldn't run. So we were developing a program that we thought would help her, because most of what we were dealing with in our classes for the younger kids were, of course, enhancing the development of all of those motor skills, locomotive skills, so many other things. So in that process, I already kind of knew and I knew from my other 3 children, my older 3 daughters, that there are certain milestones he should be hitting. So in the occupational therapy, we learned too that he was tactile defensive, which means he didn't like to, for example, he didn't like to put his bare feet on grass. He didn't like certain foods. He would gag at the sight of Jell-O. He wouldn't touch certain things. So extremely defensive as far as his tactile touching and feeling things. He did have some sensitivity to sounds, so lawnmowers, the vacuum cleaner, things like that, you could tell they disturbed him. Although he did not scream and do a lot of the things that other children with autism are known to do. And I think that's just because he grew up in such a loud family that from the get-go, we were musicians, so there was always noise. And growing up, immediately with 3 older girls in the house, there was always music, and I cleaned the house all the time. There was just lots of noise. So I don't think he had a choice but to adapt to that. Anyway, so through the occupational therapy, we learned things like brushing his feet and his hands with a really soft bristle brush. That helped. And, something so simple you wouldn't think it would help, but it did help. Eventually, he did start rocking and getting up on his hands and knees and crawling and so forth, but he still wasn't pulling himself up to stand. And his crawling, I say crawling, but it was really still the belly scoot with an occasional get up on his knees and rock. So about the time that he started doing that, we bought a new house. We had this beautiful 2-story home built, and it had high ceilings, of course the stairs, 2-story, and tons of light. The difference between that house and the house that he was born in, it was an older home. It was dark. It had small windows. There wasn't a whole lot of room for him to crawl around. The way the sun came in, there was no window really in that house that let any sun in because of the trees and the bushes that we had and so on. So between that and the spinning, rocking chair thing that my mom bought him, and the jumper in the doorway, that old-fashioned jumper in the doorway, I think moving to the home with the light and the stairs, and I think that's helped stimulate him. I really do. Because within a few months of us moving into that house, he was suddenly crawling, pulling himself up to a stand, and walking, all within a short period of time. Now, I know that, that can be typical, but I personally really believe that it was the stimulation of the combination of those things. So we found that he loved the jumping. And later, of course, I discovered that sensory integration activities like jumping, swinging, all of those kinds of things, for people with autism, it tends to calm things down in their brain. So for him, it definitely was noticeable. But it took me a while to understand all that because there wasn't a lot of information out there. And of course, at this time, this was in the early 90s. So computers were, they were there and the internet was there. But as far as information, it hadn't been really put online yet. There was a lot of stuff that just suddenly I was starting to access as it came online. So I discovered a lot. It was an interesting time for this to happen because it was probably during a time when, the perfect time really, because I was learning along with the experts. And my son was, in a way, an experiment in what could be. So he was doing well. So before his, let's see, that was 90, he was born in 94. And by the time we moved, it was late 96. So before he was 3, he was walking and pretty much running. So in the next video, I'm going to talk to you about escaping, because that's the next thing he learned. So his seizures were controlled. He's standing. He's not speaking yet. That's something that happens a little later for him as well. But chapter 2, that was chapter 2. That's the progress. The doctor that said he'll never tie his shoes and have to be put in an institution, I wish I could show him now. But anyway, thank you for joining me for chapter 2, and I look forward to telling you all about the next thing. All right. Bye till later.